with the Holy Saturday reading. And we did that because I think there's this important note in John, especially if you're looking at Peter, which is what we've been doing throughout all of Lent and Holy Week, is sort of looking at Peter's journey. And I think there's this important moment. See, on Maundy, Thursday, and Good Friday, Peter fails Jesus. I mean, on Maundy, Thursday, Jesus looks him in the face and says, "You're going to deny me 3 times before the cock crows tomorrow morning." And Peter's like, "No, I'm not. I will die for you, Jesus." And yet, just hours later, he will deny Jesus 3 times. Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, they are Pharisees, but more importantly, they are not just Pharisees. They are Pharisees that believe in Christ. But they've secretly been believing in Christ in their own ways, right? Unfortunately, they were so secretly believing in Christ that when they sat on the Sanhedrin that very night, that late night, early morning, where they could have done something, where they could have spoken up, where they could have stopped the trial, where they could have stopped the injustice, and yet they stayed silent. In their inaction, they denied Christ just as loudly, just as profoundly as Peter did with his words, they did with their inaction. We read that because on that Holy Saturday, I like to believe that Peter saw it. See, I think Peter had been frozen after he had pulled his sword and been told to sheath it. He had gone and sat and denied. I believe that come Saturday morning, he was probably still around that coal fire that had long gone out, in the cold, by himself, in despair for what he had said, what he had not done. See, none of the 3 of them ever make it to the cross. The Bible's very clear that there are the women at the cross, and maybe the disciple that Jesus loved at the cross, but that is not Peter. Peter is in such despair, he misses on saying goodbye to his loved teacher. He misses the crucifixion altogether. He never makes it there. The despair that must have run in Peter must have been great. His anger at Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea for not doing something must have been greater. And yet, on that Saturday morning, what he does is he looks out and he sees their small, trivial thing that they can do. Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, even though they had failed, go to Pilate, who could have easily killed them, and said, "Hey, can we at least have the body? Can we give this guy a proper burial? He didn't have a proper trial and he didn't have a proper death, but can we just have a proper funeral?" Way too little, way too late, but it's better something than nothing, right? I like to think that Peter sees that in the distance. Sees those 2 doing what they can with where they are. And in that moment, a spark goes off. The spark we talked about on the first week when we first meet Peter. The same spark that has Jesus call him. That spark that had him sit in a boat, see a guy named Jesus who says, "I'm the Son of God, follow me." And he got out of that boat and said, "Sure, I'm ready for this." Even though he had no clue what he was getting himself into, even though he had no idea what Jesus really meant, even though he will prove over and over to simply not get it, he will have this thing called hope. He will have hoped in a better world and therefore followed Jesus. He would have hoped for the world to change, and therefore he walked to Maundy, Thursday. But as his hope dwindled, as he hit the morning of Good Friday, his hope was broken. He fell to complete despair. But I think seeing Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus do what they could sparks this other little flame of hope. A little flame that keeps him from just leaving right away. He doesn't leave until after he sees Jesus' tomb empty. Something kept him around. It's completely illogical to stay there. They just killed Jesus. He cut someone's ear off. The police are looking for him. Why hasn't he fled the city? And I think the reason he hasn't fled is because he's got this hope that just maybe, just somehow, something will happen. And it's in that moment of hope and in that moment of despair where they are fighting internally inside of himself that Mary Magdalene breaks in with the news. The body is gone. She doesn't say he's risen. She says the body is gone. And yet it is that hope that gets Peter and the beloved disciple to not just walk, not just wonder, not just think to themselves, but run there. I wonder what the others were doing. My guess is still hiding over someone's garage because a week later, that's where we find them. That's what they're doing when Doubting Thomas and that whole story happens a week after today. They're hiding. But I believe what separates Peter is that he has this hope that there is something. There is something that's got to happen. This cannot be the end. This cannot be the last breath. He could not have missed the last time to say goodbye. And he runs to that tomb. He finds it empty. He finds the linens nicely wrapped, which is something that if you're stealing a body, you're not going to care about. And well, he does not understand. The Bible is directly and literally clear that he has no idea what's going on. It lifts him from his despair. See, there's this funny thing about hope. The world has a concept of hope. The world's concept of hope, which the world both goes ahead and tells everyone to do, but also ridicules everyone for doing it, is totally different than the Christian understanding of hope. When the world says, you should hope, what they mean is when your computer has turned to the blue screen of death on you, and then you kick it out of frustration, turn it off, kick it again, your hope is, well, if I turn it back on, maybe it'll work now, because kicking so makes sense from an IT perspective, right? That is the world's version of hope. The thing you do when everything else has failed. The world's version of hope is empty. You send your hopes and regards when you have nothing else to say. You send your prayers and your hopes when you have no intention of solving the problem. That is the world's hope. It is a statement of surrender, of giving up, and of utmost inaction. But that is not Christian hope. Christian hope is almost the opposite of that. See, Christian hope is the understanding that no matter how bad it gets, no matter how dark the night is, no matter how badly you have failed, no matter how badly the world seems to have turned, God is there. And with all things are possible in God. All things are possible with God. And therefore, hope is about taking that next step. And then the next. And then the next. In the darkest of days. Because you know that God is out there working to make the world a better place. And calling you to participate in it. Hope in the Christian world is what gives birth to tenacity. It is what gives birth to grit. It is what gives birth to being able to stand up and take one step, one day at a time, until you walk out of the shadow of darkness and into the gloriousness of Easter. So you keep walking to get out of Good Friday until you are finally at the resurrection. Hope is what sustains us. Hope is what empowers us. Hope is what calls us to action when action seems crazy. Hope is what has gotten generation after generation through the worst of times. My favorite symbol of hope in history. I don't know if any of you realize this. When you go to your grandparents' house and they have a chime clock. How many of you all have grandparents with chime clocks? Okay? Yeah, we all have grandparents. Some of us may have chime clocks. Okay? You know what that most likely is? You all know this song, right? Dun, 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 dun. Yeah, you're learning how bad I sing. Okay? But you know what that sound is? That's the sound of Big Ben. Almost all chime clocks, 90-something% of them are set to that in the United States. Do you know why they're all set to that in the United States? Because during World War II, as the Nazis bombed the bejeebers out of the United Kingdom, every morning the BBC worldwide would start with those chimes. Because if those chimes were playing, London had not fallen. Talk about dark times. Talk about hope. That is why our grandparents and our parents and so many generations from that point on listened for those chimes, take comfort in those bells. Because on the darkest night for our nation, those chimes symbolized the hope of freedom. Christian hope is not what you do when all else is lost. Christian hope is a call to service, a call to believe the world can be better, and a call to come together to make it so. As you go out today, take a few minutes in your life. Take a few minutes and pray and be and meditate with God and ask yourself, where have you given up hope? Where is it that God is trying to spark a hope in you as he did in Peter all those many years ago? Where did the bells chime for you and where did they lead? Amen.